our Central and East, and good evening to the people coming in from Europe today. You are joining us for an APSIA webinar. My name is Manny Saris. I work with Jenzabar. I am the Director of Strategic Consulting Services, focusing on continuing education. In our webinar today, I'm being partnered up with Joe Miera from the University of New Mexico. Joe, go ahead and introduce yourself.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all of you. Thank you for joining us today. As Benny said, I'm Joe Miera. I serve as Executive Director for UNM Continuing Education in the Operations and Extended Learning Contracts capacity. So I sort of work both sides of the house in terms of program and then operations, which is program support. Benny?
And Joe and I have actually done this presentation together at one of the APSIA regionals, APSIA West, and we had a great crowd there, and we had some really good feedback. So we thought, with the conversations that have been happening regarding CE organizations and how a structure should look and how duties should be delegated, plus the new conversations popping up about centralized versus decentralized, we thought it would be good to bring this webinar back out and really get people involved and have some questions coming. Just a little information about today's presentation. If you have questions throughout, feel free to go ahead and put them in the Q&A section. And as they come up, if we're not going to be answering them later, I'll actually pop those questions up and ask either myself or Joe to answer them as we're going along. So please bring out those questions anytime. Our agenda for today, we're going to really look at a few different things. And we're going to start off by looking at how things happened at UNM. Joe has been through a really large restructure and centralization of duties. So we're going to be checking out some organizational charts and looking at the structure, seeing how things have happened, taking a look at some job descriptions, and then really focusing on, how do you put this all together? How do you develop some manuals and some organizational workflows to really optimize what you're going to be doing within your organization? So let's start off by a poll question. What I wanted to do is get an idea from our audience how big your departments are, and kind of get an idea what we're going to be talking about and who's listening in right now. So Charlie, can you throw up that first poll question?
Yep, let me open that right up here. First one. Okay, that should be open.
All right, so as you can see, what we're trying to do is figure out what the size of your CE department is. So if you wouldn't mind, just go ahead and click on the one that works with your department. So if you're a smaller one, 1 to 5, or however size you are, just go ahead and click and then hit submit. And then what we're going to do is pop up the results just so everybody can see where we kind of stand. I'm going to give it about 20 more seconds just so we can keep this moving. And the idea behind this for us is to, we have it gauged right now for our presentation to look anywhere between 20 to 50 people. But we want to be able to give you more information if your department is smaller or if it's bigger. So give us about 10 more seconds. All right, and how do we pop that poll answer up?
Let's see. You want me to share that with you, with the attendees?
All right, so it looks like we have, pretty average. Everybody is kind of everywhere. So this is going to work out perfectly. Looks like we have a few big departments here, so that's really good. So let's send it over to Joe. Let him start talking about what he's done at UNM, kind of an idea of organizational chart there, and he'll be able to give you and share what they've done.
Thank you, Manny. Let me start first with some history of where we've been. Back in the early 2000s, before 2003, we used to function as a combined credit, non-credit unit. And then as the online and the distance education side of the house grew, a decision was made in 2004 to split us apart. So the distance education group and the for-credit group relocated to main campus, and the non-credit group, we stayed on the non-credit campus about half a mile down the road from the central campus. What ensued in the next 9 years became basically a rich person, poor person scenario. the credit side, because there was significant growth in that, grew quite wealthy and had a lot of resources to spend. The CE side of the house, we were left with non-credit programs, 2 buildings and a separate campus to cover all those costs. So what happened with us is we wound up racking up about a $1.5 million deficit during that period. So subsequent to that, back in about 2012, of course we had leadership change at that point. So a new president, a new provost, the decision was made to reunify us back as one cohesive unit, and that occurred in 2012. And with my appointment as executive in July of 2012, and I think what we found at that time was we'd grown apart, each built our own support structures. Now we're one combined unit, and we have to take a step back and look at, okay, now that we're a huge unit with 300 employees, what does this look like when you start restructuring and thinking about who's going to do what? So in the attached, in the presented organization chart, what I tried to signify was those functions that are listed in green were traditional CE functions, and those functions listed in yellow came from the distance ed side of the house. So we started looking at, okay, we have 2 operations executives, we have 2 financial executives, we have 2 marketing executives, 2 IT executives. How do we start combining for effectiveness and cost savings? So one of the first things to change was a consolidation of IT and the appointment of an IT elements executive to handle IT on both sides of the house. And we had at that time, and still do, have several product lines. We do distance education, so we do all the online programming for the university. We do in-seat non-credit programming on the CE campus. And we also we have a public service unit that has about 120 employees where we do work on behalf of the state of New Mexico in early childhood and transportation safety. So with 3 distinct business units, each doing pretty distinct type of work, it became a challenge to determine what this chart should look like and what those challenges are and what the successes have been. So one of the key principles in reorganization was creating, taking the axiom that we have program staff, those who develop programming and deliver programming, and operations staff, those who handle back office functions such as finance, accounting, human resources, and they work in support of program. So creating an internal service unit on the operations side of the house that would then support the program side of the house. So, this did not, this is not smooth sailing by any means. We're now 4 years into our grand experiment, because it started in 2012 and we're into 2016. And, we've tried a few things. Some things have worked, some things haven't. But on the whole, we feel that we're moving in the correct direction. So if we hang on to the axiom that operations staff support programs, and program staff are responsible for developing new program and developing program, then we have to take a look at what challenges and issues do we have when we try to implement that. So if we can go to the next chart, I can start talking about what we encountered and how we worked to overcome some of that stuff.
Sure, and Joe, we had a great time to question, and you kind of answered it, but I just wanted to touch on it. Somebody is asking what composes the CE department and who do we work with. So you kind of already touched on your area, and just for my area, I work with CE departments, both credit, non-credit, workforce development, and they're not just CE departments in universities. They reach out to community colleges and other organizations who offer these types of non-credit or workforce development or even credit or grant-funded programs. So I just wanted to make sure we put that out there.
Thank you, Manny. In our specific case, of that 300 people, I would say that 35 staff are specifically dedicated to continuing education function that we do. So as I mentioned, we had this huge merger, and a lot of it came with initial restructures. As I mentioned, first was the IT group and managing the learning management system, but all our IT from the learning management system all the way down to end user desktop support came under one group. And then we had a restructure of the instructional design group, we hired a new leader to lead that group, and he became in charge of both instructional design for credit and non-credit, and moving forward what new program offerings we would prepare for the market. And next we had the, as we said, restructure of compliance with student services group, but so the creation of that group. At that point, there was no effort at compliance. This was driven mainly by SARA compliance, and we had very little student services to support online students, so we had to go and create that group on the distance education side of the house. On the CE side of the house, we had to restructure of public programs because we had been losing money in the public program portfolio coming out of the recession. We had to work to integrate our external contracts. The state work that I mentioned earlier, we used to treat them and service for them as wholly separate entities. And what we found is that by using the axiom of operations group to support program, we could share costs for finance, IT, administration, conference center. So the public programs were bearing their fair share of costs, and so that the external contracts were also bearing their fair share of costs. With that came a refocus of operations. For example, do we need 2 marketing managers? Well, in this case, the decision was made to keep one and not the other. And then beyond that, taking the marketing group and getting them to focus on both credit and non-credit marketing. And we tried that for 3 years. And in the end, the conclusion was that maybe we really do need to have 2 separate marketing groups, each focused on specific product lines. So while we have one marketing group, they have their specific focuses. Next slide, please. The rationale. So reasons for unification. I think the biggest was that the university leadership felt that we were stronger as a combined unit, and we could serve as the academic service unit for both credit and non-credit programs across the university. Initially, when I had mentioned that extended learning got very rich during that 10-year period where there was a boom in online enrollment, the belief was that they were taking dollars away from the academic areas. So at the time of reunification, the structure was changed so that the academic units keep the dollars generated, and we became as a whole a service unit to the academic unit, both in credit and non-credit programming. So in terms of the restructure of distance education, we wind up with 3 distinct groups. The compliance group, which makes sure that we're keeping with the law and programs in all 50 states. A group, the instructional design group, that assists faculty with teaching them how to design and provide online coursework. And then the specific LMS, the IT management group, the group responsible for the day-to-day management of our LMS system. And we think in that regard we have been fairly successful. We do still have our challenges. I think further rationale, the restructure of public programs, we had to right-size those programs because they were losing money, okay? We had to work on reversing prior program losses. And then part of it was providing new leadership to help revitalize the public program portfolio. That felt that James Folks, who's our new chief programmer for continuing ed and distance ed, so he does both credit and non-credit. Integration of internal contracts, that felt to me because we went from 60,000 in state work to about 12 million this year, and with that came a lot of growth headaches. It's one thing to wish and desire to grow. It's another thing to grow very, very quickly and have to hire quickly, integrate that staff, train managers to manage their programs, train staff to support the program. And so that's been our challenge the last 4 years in terms of growth of that management and then integration of that growth into our structure. In addition to that, we picked up a new product line, which is transportation safety. For the state of New Mexico, we license all the driving schools in New Mexico, and we license all the instructors in those schools. And we also license the ignition interlock programs and monitor them on behalf of the state. So that's about $1 million worth of work. And then early childhood is about $10 million. We basically hire job coaches and place them in daycares around the safety programs to help them develop the workforce. And then our newest product line has been working with the motor vehicle department on their new tapestry system and workforce training on that system. So integration of the contracts is key, and then refocusing on operations. So we have all this new work in program to provide. What changes do we have to make internally to support that growth. And part of it was adding two accounting technicians to the accounting staff to help process all those transactions, adding to our human resources group 2 persons to take on and manage 110 new employees, and then making the case for why the contracts should pay their fair share of those costs. So when we look back now, having integrated, we had several goals. Our goal first was to make sure that both sides were bearing their fair share costs, okay? And to create that distinction between programs and operations support. Challenges, I think what we found was teaching operations staff to understand their support role. I think prior to this integration, it took a lot of cultural climate change to get the operations staff to understand that your job is to support program and make sure that program is doing their best so we're getting enrollment and generating revenue. So getting them to embrace that culture of internal service, I think we struggle with even today. Are we better at than we were 4 years ago? Yes, but I still think we have some challenges there. And then on the other side of the house, getting the program staff to focus on new program development, that they're doing their part to develop new programs and revamp existing programs, and more than anything, to get them to let go of operational tasks. I think for them, that lack of trust in terms of, well, I'll just do it myself because I want to make sure that it gets done, has been a concern for them, which I fully understand. And I think our side of that, the operations side, is okay, we pick up that task, we have to make sure that we're executing correctly and on time for the benefit of the students and the instructors in the classroom. So have we made progress in our goal? Yes, we have. Do we need to make further progress? Yes, I think we do.
Hey, Joe, you had a question from the audience, and it might be too open-ended, but it'd be nice to at least touch on it at some point. How did you determine when and how to make the changes to your department?
Actually, that became difficult. I think what we tried to do is work with one group first. Okay, let's work with IT first, since they represented the biggest challenge for the CE side of the house. We lacked really solid IT support. So I think the determination of when and how was driven more by immediacy of need. I desperately need good IT help on the CE side of the house. So let's focus on that first. The marketing group came next in terms of, do we have opportunities for consolidation and can we work as one big group? And I think ultimately the decision was, while we tried it as a combined group, in the end the group is still focused, specific staff still focus on for-credit marketing and other staff focus on non-credit marketing. So that, while it's still one group, it didn't go quite as well in terms of full integration. Next, we're focusing on business office. Do we need 2 financial officers on each side of the house? And our current task is basically, we think that one person is close to retirement, and when that person retires, then they likely would not be replaced, and we have the opportunity to more closely integrate what has been 2 business offices into one under single leadership. So most of what drove the decision making was immediacy of need. What are the big things we need to fix right now just to keep functioning? So I hope that answers your question. So where have we had successes? I think where we've had successes first is in getting the program staff trained so they understand their numbers, that they understand the need for revenue generation, and that they're hitting specific profitability margins, because their profitability margins have to cover the cost centers on the operations side of the house, which is the business office, human resources, and IT. So they have to generate enough revenue and enough profit that we have enough left over to cover those other costs. I think another success has been better distribution of our operating costs, splitting them between the distance ed group, the CE group, and the contracts group has led to better equity in who's paying for what costs. And I think that's important to the staff, because the programmers understand that there's overhead and has to be covered, but it's important to them that they bear their share, that they're not being underburdened with costs just because they can. I think another success was training on the program staff to have them focus specifically on program development. Your job is to develop new programs, to tweak existing programs, and to let go of programs if they aren't working. We had a change in the hiring process where we have local control of hiring now, so we hire within the organization and work with central IT, central human resources, in terms of making the case for what we need specifically within our organization. And then I think our biggest success is in staff training for them to understand their specific roles. That you understand that if you're in operations, your goal is to support program for the greater success of our students. So I think that's places where we've had a lot of success. Next slide, please. Yes, sir.
Joe, we have another question from the audience. It says, when do you make the handoff on a new program from program development to implementation or operations?
We usually wait 3 years. Okay. What we do is we call an incubator account. So we'll launch a new program. I'm speaking from the operations perspective, so this is my opinion. My experience is programmers tend to be optimistic about how well the program's going to do, especially in the first 2-3 years. And our experience is, you hit a wall of reality that you didn't generate anywhere near the enrollment you thought you were going to generate. So to mitigate that, what we do is we take a new program and we put it in an incubator account. And while it's in the incubator for the first 3 years, it bears no burdened overhead costs. So it's not required to pay rent or assessment for business office, IT, and marketing. So it has a chance to grow and thrive. And then after 3 years, we'll take a look at it and say, yeah, this is viable. It could be a standalone program, or it could be folded into someone else's portfolio if it's moderately successful and isn't big enough to have its own person managing it. But we can take a 3-year approach with that.
Okay, and just knowing what other people do, I'll just touch on that for a little bit. It really depends on the staff that you have in place for program development and implementation. Usually what we're seeing is program development and the first year of implementation is taken care of by the same person, and then repeat classes are then they take a different type of workflow to bring it back into the catalog and being offered. So depending on your staffing, it usually starts with some type of program developer or coordinator who implements it in its first year, and then it moves on to operations to do the day-to-day and then the repeat of the programs.
So in our case, it'll stay with the program person all 3 years until we're sure that it's stable and the kinks are worked out. Then, in that fourth year, those tasks will start getting distributed to operations.
Great. We have another poll that we're going to do real quick. Charlie, if you could pop the poll up. What we're trying to do is figure out how you feel your department if you're staffed properly. So what we're asking is basically, are you understaffed? Is everything fine? Or are you overstaffed? So you should see that poll question come up. Go ahead and click on one of those responses and hit submit. The goal here, and what we're going to transition to, is understanding what staffing looks like. I know Joe went through, he's in a 4-year process and continuing to make those changes. So the work is a significant amount, but we'd really like to start at looking at the staff and identifying where those changes need to be made and how they need to make them. So although it may seem complicated, what we're going to move into is a simplification of the process of how to look at your staff and really how to focus the job descriptions properly and for them not to be repetitive. So let's go ahead and about 5 more seconds on this poll, and then Charlie, if you wouldn't mind, let's pop up those results.
Okay, I just hit close, and it's going to close down in 15 seconds, and then I will share.
My guess here is the majority of people will be saying they are understaffed or perfectly staffed. Mostly, we rarely see somebody saying that they're overstaffed. In the meantime, what we're trying to do is really get an idea of how to best optimize the duties that are happening within your department and making sure that the people are doing the work that needs to be done in order for you to focus on your goals. So we're going into this with the assumption that you have a strategy in place and your goals are already set for the next year, and you want to create the work and workflows to get you to where you need to be to achieve those goals.
And sharing now, Manny.
Thank you, Charlie. All right, so just as I expected, we actually have some people answering that they're overstaffed. I love it. I almost never get to see that in some of these, but the majority of the people say they're understaffed, and then we have a few that are perfectly staffed in the numbers there are. So let's talk about the simplification process. So when I go in and work with CE departments or organizations, and we do a reorganization, and we want to look at how to make things more efficient, I really look at it through these four boxes, and what I like to call it is this is my blue and red, or on this screen it's blue and orange for some reason. What I want to do is I want to go in and I want to figure out what the people that currently work for you, what they love to do, what they hate doing, what they have the proper skills to do, and what they don't. The focus of going into this, and I'll just explain the process. When a school brings me in and they want me to figure out how to build their most optimal department, what I do is I take a look at the job descriptions and I first meet with the administrators or with the dean who's involved and try to figure out what the goals are and how they want to get to those goals to achieve those goals. From there, I look at the job descriptions and see what jobs need to be there and what jobs could be moved around. And then I actually interview every single person on staff, and I go through their job description and I talk to them, and my goal is to figure out what they love doing as part of their job currently, what they hate doing, what they actually have the skill set for and they're really skilled at doing, and what they don't have the skills for. The idea behind this chart is to focus all the energy and create the jobs for the people to have the blue squares and really try to avoid those orange or red squares. As we build and rebuild job descriptions, what we're wanting to do is really rewrite those to focus on what they love doing and what they're skilled at. And what this is trying to do for us is create an environment where the people are coming to work and doing the work that they enjoy. Obviously, there's some scenarios in which we can't have the perfect job description, and they're going to have to take on some of those duties. But what we found is the more work you give somebody that they love doing, they're willing to take on that work that they have the skill but don't really like it as much. So we enter this compromise, we enter this negotiation with the person, and as much as we want to give them the work they love doing, what we definitely, with 100% certainty want to do is get rid of any job in their job description that they are not skilled or do not have the ability to get trained to do. What we've learned is that this is the one thing that takes the most time away from what's happening on a daily basis at work. And we want to make sure that they can focus all their energy on doing what they need to do to be successful in their job on a daily basis. We actually had a question just come in. What happens if our staff is unionized? That is a great question. Having staff that are unionized complicates this a little bit. One of the things that we know is a job description written in conjunction with a union, it's often hard to change what the jobs are going to look like or what the person will be doing. So in this scenario, what we like to do is try to stay as close to the original job descriptions, but really focus a lot of our energy on those other jobs as described. And one of the ways we get around getting into any type of grievance or any type of issues with the union is by negotiating and compromising directly with the employee, showing them that they're going to get more jobs they love and less that they hate. You know, they could see the benefits of making this work and how they could become more successful in what they're doing on a daily basis. Another good question just came in. My team does not like change. If I were to try this, they would be very nervous. What is the best way to let them know this is going to be the best in the future? Well, that's a good question. We actually see this a lot. Most departments, especially those that have had people that have worked there for a long, long time, they often don't like to see major changes happen. And what we found that works really the best is this conversation. It's an open dialogue. By having them understand, you know, why we would want to make these changes, by showing them what the goals are and seeing how they're being a part of them, it really makes an impact for them to see, oh, this is really good for the department. We could reach out and we could help make these goals attainable. And so they become part of the success of the department, and really bringing them in and showing them why the changes that are being made are going to be beneficial for everybody. It shows them the overall strategy, why it's working, and why they're making an impact on their own. So another question came in. Do you literally ask people what parts of your job are you unskilled at, and how do you get honest answers to these 4 quadrants? So yes and no. Usually the unskilled one usually comes from a manager that will tell us they don't have the skills for them. You know, oftentimes we do get that honest employee who will be like, I just don't have these skills. It takes me too long to do this. I'm often having to ask for help in making sure this works. But we are trying to be as open as possible. And so when we start with the manager, we will ask them mostly the skilled and unskilled questions for each employee. But we do come back, and each employee does have the chance to share their thoughts and their feelings. And sometimes, you know, we obviously get, you know, reserved responses, but normally they actually are pretty open and honest about what they're good at and what they're not good at. So as you build up from your staffing and you understand where your job descriptions need to go, the next thing to do is continue the documentation process throughout. So as you change your job description, what you're going to be changing is how each person does their job. And there's 2 things that really come on board that we really focus on to make sure that people are continuing through the work, that it's always being done the same way, and we know what everybody is doing. And this is done through creating staff manuals and process manuals. Now, I know for a long time everybody has always said, oh, these take too long, what are we going to do with these? You know, what's the point? The point is we want to make sure that every job is being done and being done properly. Not only on a team, that single individual person, but we want to make sure that if one person leaves, the next person who comes in and takes over, that transition becomes easier because we already have these manuals in place. This would include any single process of that job description. This would include an idea of what the staff person does, give you some dates and ideas of timelines, and then really focus on making sure that everybody knows what they're doing, how they're doing it, and if your staff is big enough, which it looks like we have quite a few that, you know, are more than 10 here, you always want to have backup people doing the work that a person's supposed to be focusing on. So when I go in and work with different schools, I always try to get a backup for each role, making sure that they know what to do in case of an absence or a vacation. So we're always running smoothly and efficiently, and we're not hitting any obstacles throughout. Question just came in. Do you keep your manuals electronic or hard copies? I don't think it really matters that much. A lot of people like printing them out and creating a library of manuals, but, you know, I don't think it matters as long as they're easily accessible by whoever wants to be looking at them. So let's talk about workflows. Workflows, most people listen and hear them as what we do for marketing or marketing campaigns in the CRM or reminders in the CRM. What I like to do is I like to focus when I work with schools, even if they have our higher reach CRM product or not, I really like looking at organizational workflows. What this means is we take an understanding of what needs to be done and make it a step-by-step process. So when you look at a workflow, what you're doing is the main part of this is to understand the end result. So every single workflow, you're going to have a start, and you need to get to that by knowing what the end result is. And you'll go step by step to figure out what that process is. You'll know who's going to be a part of it, and you'll think through all the paths the workflow can possibly take. So let's take you through what the questionnaire actually looks like. So the first thing you have to ask yourself when you're developing this workflow is, what is the end goal of the process? So once you have that set up, you can go to the next step, which is what needs to occur in order for this process to run. What this means is you want to start listing out what the steps are to actually make this workflow look like workflow. And, eventually when we get to the next slide, I'll actually take you through the building of a specific workflow. But the next question you want to be asking yourself is, what needs to happen when this process runs? So throughout the process, what exactly is happening, and what am I needing to do to make sure that the workflow is continuing to move forward? And finally, are there instances when this should not occur? So during this path, we know that not everything is going to run smoothly. We know that there's going to be obstacles, and we know there's going to be times that we're going to have to make changes and take a different path. And so we do this by understanding what can go wrong, what can change the path, what can change the process, and prepare for that. Now, when we build these workflows, when we build the first one, I always like to call them our foundational piece workflow. And that's because we're going to always add to it and continue to edit it as things happen. And we do this because we're never going to get it right the first time. What we're always understanding is these workflows will change and these processes will change, so we just have to be aware of it. So as we go through, year after year or semester after semester, as these workflows are being continuously used, or however you put them in your CRM, or if you have the higher reach CRM, however you put them in, we're able to continuously understand what additional processes to add, what we need to take out, and other instances in which things may not occur. So let's take a look at an example. So for this example, what we're looking at is somebody just put together an event. Let's say it was a conference. And beginning at the end of the conference, what our goal for this workflow is to get confirmation that somebody wants to participate next year, and that we have to start our internal sales process. So the workflow starts pretty simply. In the system, we'll have the end date of the conference, and from there it triggers the notification to the coordinator to send out the thank you letters to everybody who helped out, or to everybody who attended, or to the vendors who were at the conference. So that'll be an easy notification, and you can even go as far as having those letters being directly sent out that were prepared for this workflow before the conference even happened. Or the coordinator just gets this reminder, and the thank you letters, will go out manually. From there, another notification comes out a week later asking for a response to the letters that came out. And in those letters, they'll be asking, like, will you participate next year? If there's any other types of questions you want to add. So here's when we know that something may or may not change. From here, if we don't get a response, we could set up an additional notification to come out saying we didn't get a response from this person. Why don't you send a follow-up email after 2 weeks? If we've already received all the responses, we can continue on as you see that workflow coming. But if not, we've created this new area that we know that there has been a change to the workflow. We have to make sure that we understand that this is still happening. We haven't received the response. Let's say we receive the response. That's great. It goes back and enters back into the initial workflow. If not, and we don't get a response, then we get another notification after 4 weeks saying, let's send out one more and see what happens. If at that point we get a response, it enters back on the right track. But if not, we've made the decision that after two follow-ups, we're going to go ahead and take them off of this notification list, and then the coordinator will get another reminder to make sure that they're reaching out in 3 months' time, just in case they want to keep the sales cycle open with that person. Otherwise, the workflow of the end process is really beginning the sales cycle for this organization and for this event for next year. So as you can see, I've obviously showed a very, very simple workflow here, but this gives you an idea of what it looks like, how simple it is in order to put it into a system, what it would look like, and the possibilities of building it out, and how it could be for every single process you take. So we could go further to say, our catalog is due on this day. We can create workflows for check-ins for every single program. Working with a marketing department, we know when things have to happen. Communication with teachers, room reservations, all of those things. We can create all of these, and we automate these processes. No longer are we going to have coordinators with thousands of Post-it notes on their desks where you're trying to remind themselves of when things are happening or due dates, or our desk calendar is all of a sudden being completely filled with scratch-offs and pen marks of people forgetting it. We can automate all these processes. The ultimate goal for us is to optimize our time, work more efficiently, and focus on our goal, which ultimately is most likely enrollment increases and revenue increases. So we try to take the busy work out and automate it as much as possible. So the Higher Reach CRM, we built ours on Salesforce, and if you know anything about Salesforce, you know how powerful of a tool it is and the things that we can do on it. And obviously, the CRMs not only are, as an individual, do you become more efficient, but as a manager, you have the ability to look at these dashboards and get these reports to make sure that your staff is staying on top of it. So the management of your staff becomes a million times easier. And you can get this as often as you need, and you get this reporting quickly, so you make sure you stay on top of things as they're happening. And Salesforce, it's just a pretty thing. So you get to see so many things, and you can always stay up to date on what's going on. Obviously, working for Jenzabar, we have this as our Higher Reach CRM, and we've gotten such great feedback on how these workflows are being built and put in, and how they're making a difference, not just for marketing purposes, but actually to make the organization a more powerful and more efficient organization. So just to touch on it for one more second before we move on, the important part of this organizational efficiency, it's to really achieve the goals that you have as a manager, as a group, to build and create those goals and actually get to them when you need to. So as we go in and see the changes that Joe made in New Mexico, and that we work with schools every day to make sure that the organizations are becoming more efficient, we want to take away from time being wasted and people spending it doing the right types of things. And we do that through looking at your staff and creating the manuals and creating these workflows. So that kind of takes us to the 45-minute mark, and we wanted to take a couple minutes to do any types of question and answers. Does anybody have any additional questions they want to ask? It looks like we have one that comes up. It says, when you build these workflows, how are you understanding what the end process should be? Okay, that's a good question. Usually when we create these workflows, you already know what the goal is going to be. When you look at somebody's job description, they actually have these duties on there already. Their end process could be any of those duties brought out into detail. So let's say a coordinator who's developing programs. One of their workflows could be development of a new certificate program, or one of their end processes could be completing a contract with a local vendor. And from there, they'll actually have all the steps that go within that workflow. So let's just say we're looking at it as a sales cycle and contract training. What we would do is we would create the actual entire workflow to talk about reaching out to a potential client, and then throughout the sales cycle to the end process of the contract training. So it could be as few as 2, 3, 4, 5 steps, or it could be as many steps as you need to complete that workflow. So it's not just the small jobs. It could be a lot going on for each workflow that you build out. And for that, it's even nicer as I don't know if anybody attended our last UPSIA webinar that we did with Emory, but they actually showed how they used the CRM, the Higher Reach CRM, to work with the sales team and make sure that their sales team is always staying on task, keeping all of their information, and making sure that the workflows that are put into the system are working for them to bring in more of those contracts. We have a question for Joe. How do you calculate the share of operational costs to assign to the external contractor programs? Do you share revenue or assign percentage of staff time?
What we worked on doing for external contracts was to assign percentage of staff time, because as we grew, we found that most of all that new work is a result of the contract. So if we're going to add staff to support the contracts, then the contract should bear those costs proportionately. We did have to do some estimates, for example, for my time between the two portfolios, and for our chief financial officer for her time between the portfolios. But normally we start with an allocation base, meaning we know we have about 1.9 million in operational costs to cover and spread across programs, and then we do an initial spread by dollar volume. So if your program's bigger, you're gonna go and bear more of your fair share of that cost. That doesn't always work on the surface of it. So then we go back and tweak and say, okay, well, we know this is a smaller program that eats up more business operations time, so business office time. So we're going to charge that program more. So we work first from an allocation base and then look at FTE assigned to that task to determine how to calculate those costs. And it becomes a fairly lengthy spreadsheet, I will say that, yes.
Thanks, Joe. And there's another question for you, actually. At UNM, how hard did you find changing people's jobs? Did you have to let go or hire new staff throughout the process?
Actually, we've done some of both. We work more with people who have left, because as people leave, then we take the job and sort of, does this job fit in operations? Does it fit here? What can we do to redesign this job? Something that we started doing here in Mexico is most of the staff had been what we call classified staff, meaning if you hire them, they're pretty much set in their job, and there's a lot of due process that would have to take place to either change their job, move them to another job, or release the employee. So 4 years ago, what we started doing is hiring employees on a term basis, which means that when I hire somebody, they're appointed for a specific term, usually for the fiscal year through next June 30th. And unless I do something proactive to reappoint them when the job expires on June 30th, then they have no job, and they're done with the university. And so that has given us some flexibility two ways. One, if we have a position we don't need anymore, getting that basically telling that person, you better start looking, because for next year I don't think we're going to be doing that anymore. And then it works particularly well if we have a less performers or non-performers, and being unable to get them motivated to step up to the plate, then next June they're done as well. So that's worked particularly well for us in terms of having that ability.
And also, just to touch on that, when I work with different schools, and even in my past jobs as a dean or director of CE, whenever I go through this reorganization, the goal is always to keep the staff in place and make sure that the jobs are put to the people who want to be doing them and they're skilled at it. So of all the schools that I've ever worked with before, we've actually never let go of anybody. We've had to hire on occasion, but normally we're working with the staff, and we're able to make the appropriate adjustments with the staff in place in order to really achieve those goals and make sure that all the jobs within those job descriptions are still being completed with the staff that's already there.
This is Joe. I'd add to Minnie's comments, which is, even in my perspective, I am loath to let go of staff, especially if they're performing and they can be repurposed. My take is give the employee every opportunity to succeed. And then, if you still have the problem, but then I'm left without choice but non-renewal. But I would second Minnie's comments about it's important that the staff understand that, we're giving them every chance to succeed.
Great. Well, you guys have our contact information on your screen now. Feel free to contact either of us. Also, if you have any interest in taking a look at Jenzabar's strategic consulting services, you go to our website at jenzabar.com and pull those up. I'm currently working with a few schools, and I would be happy to have a conversation with you. We have a week left in our Apple Watch raffle, so if you do a 30-minute consultation with me, you'll be put into that raffle. We appreciate your time today. And you'll be able to check out this webinar and share it once we post it on our website in a couple days. Thank you so much.
Great. Manny, Joe, thank you very much for your time, and we'll have that posting up within 48 hours. Have a great afternoon, everyone.